Hi, everyone. And as the technology moves forward, I am trying different formats to get the messages across. So I will be once a week trying to do live broadcasts, sharing some ideas, but more importantly, I mean, something exciting happened recently. I moved from being a consultant who used to do outsourcing work for different sovereign funds and investment funds, where they would invite me to help redesign their risk management strategy or do some quantitative risk analysis on the investment deals that they were pursuing. I moved from a purely outsourcing role. I moved to an in-house role and now have the position of a chief risk officer in a large multi-billion dollar chemical company. So I thought I'll create this little broadcast and try and make it regular. Create this little broadcast, and I'll call it a typical day in the life of an atypical CRO, because as if you have been following some of the work I do, I have very different, sometimes, some people say controversial views on risk management. I don't value risk management one, and whenever possible, I try and avoid it. And I do, in fact, spend or try to spend as much time as possible on risk management too. I try and apply the research and the tools and the techniques in decision science and probability theory and risk psychology to the field that we call risk management. And I do encourage everybody asking questions. The first question is, what is a CRO? CRO is a chief risk officer, which is a senior executive position responsible for integrating risk management into decision-making, into governance, into the culture of the organization, and responsible for doing a lot of the quant work associated with quantifying the effect uncertainty has on decisions, objectives, strategy, and so on. So, as a newly appointed CRO, I thought I'll keep this regular, so you can expect something similar next week. But I will also try and kind of share, without obviously sharing any of the confidential stuff, and without disclosing any information that could be considered controversial. I will try and share some of the interesting, important lessons that, as the new CRO, I mean, I have been in the role of a CRO a few years back, but as the new CRO this year in 2020, I'll share some of the interesting perspectives, and I'll try and do this regular. And hi, everyone who's watching this live, or you'll watch this in replay. I mean, that's the beauty of technology. You can watch this live and have the benefit of asking questions, which is actually pretty cool. And you can watch it. In replay. It will be available on the YouTube channel. Don't forget, Risk Academy YouTube channel. It's quite big because I try and put a lot of interesting stuff there, extracts and some of the sessions from Risk Awareness Week. They're available for free, and you can watch them on the Risk Academy YouTube channel. All the interviews, and I try, whenever I speak at the conference, I try and broadcast that to the YouTube channel as well. So anyway, that's the idea. You will see the format of these broadcasts evolving as time goes by. Just like late night shows, I'll try and come up with something fun. I'll share something not just useful and practical from a risk management perspective. I'll try and share something fun as well, so we can have a good time. But for this session, I picked up a few lessons that I thought were, I mean, some of them were surprise to me, just surprise on how significant and how much ignored they are by many senior risk professionals. So the first one, and that's kind of, I mean, that was obvious on one side and then surprising on the other side. The first thing that I discovered when I joined, so I joined a multi-billion-dollar company. They did have some risk management in place, but it was primarily risk management one in the past. which is fine. And I've joined them with with the mandate to try and bring the risk management 1 to risk management 2. And the first thing that most people in the company said is that we don't have any risk management. You will have to build it from scratch. Now, deep inside, I knew that surely cannot be true, because it's a multi-billion-dollar company. It's been operating for years. Executives have been making decisions for a long time. None of these, many of the tools and techniques that we have under the banner of risk management, they existed for hundreds of years. Risk management is not unique or new in that regard. And then, of course, as I started investigating, and this is what I started doing. First is I started talking to all the different executives and different teams, just to try and appreciate, is there truth to this claim that there's no risk management in the company and I will have to build something from scratch? And the good news is, and this is where the surprise came, first, it's obviously not true. Every single organization on the planet has risk management in place. Whether it's effective or not effective, whether it's used to its full potential, that's a separate question. But every single company on the planet has risk management. And let me rephrase that. Not just has risk management too. Now, I call it risk management too. And in the Risk Academy blog, you can find, and here's the link to the Risk Academy blog. You can find the article about what is risk management 1 and risk management 2. Risk management 2 is basically about integrating into decision making. So I found so many instances of amazing risk management 2. And here are just some of the examples. The commercial team, when making investment decisions, used scenarios and decision trees. And for some of the bigger investment decisions, they actually used simulations. The treasury team, of course, the treasury team would do that. Treasury team actually has a pretty good grasp on most of the financial risks. In fact, they have been using simulations and quantitative risk analysis for years and have been doing a pretty decent job at it. And investment teams, so I started talking about to investment teams. Sensitivity analysis, of course they do that. Scenario analysis, they do that most of the time. Strategy team do scenarios. All of those are examples of risk management too. So don't fall. I mean, this is my advice to probably risk consultants, because I'm guessing senior risk managers already know that. But this is my advice to the risk consultants: is don't fall into the trap that you think organizations are not mature, not ready for quantitative risk analysis. That couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, that is literally just a complete deception. The only people who may or may not be ready for quantitative risk analysis are the risk managers themselves. Because regardless of what risk managers are doing, CFOs, investments, head of commercial, head of pricing, head of strategy, they have been doing quantitative risk analysis forever. They just never called it quantitative risk analysis, because the techniques that we use have developed outside of the field of risk management. I mean, risk management per se is relatively new, but the probability theory, which is the foundation of what we do in risk analysis, is 500 years old. Decision science is more than 100 years old, and the risk psychology and risk perception, the study in behavioral economics, are more than 70 years old. So all of the fundamental sciences and the tools that we now try and call risk management, I don't know whether we have the actual claim on the risk management where we are fair in claiming that risk management is ours. All these techniques, all these tools have been around forever. So the first lesson and the first surprise as the new CRO for me was that instead of changing and boiling the ocean and changing the universe and thinking that you're going to come in and start bringing this risk conversation to the table, we all have to realize that risk conversations have been happening decades before some clever person created the concept of risk management. Risk conversations are a natural part of doing business. So part of my job as the new CRO is not to and sorry, Const is asking a question whether this is a recording or a live session. It is a live session. See, I've just interrupted myself half the sentence just to prove a point. And every week this will be live session. So no, not a recording. Feel free to ask any questions you want, and I'll kind of try and incorporate it into the conversation. Now, technology is amazing, but it's still kind of growing, and I'm using the software, which is great, but it is a startup company. So I can see some of the comments, but for example, I may have trouble. I'm broadcasting to YouTube, Periscope, and LinkedIn simultaneously. I may have some trouble picking up comments from LinkedIn, but try asking them anyway, and if anything, I'll just respond in the next stream. But YouTube and Periscope, I'm seeing literally just in front of me the very second you post it. So use this opportunity, please. And as I was saying, the first surprise, and quite an amazing surprise for me, was that it's really less about trying to kind of add this new layer of risk management. It's really more about trying to identify all the good practices that happen in terms of quantitative risk analysis. And again, if you've been following any of my work, quantitative risk analysis is the only one that I have any appreciation and respect for. And it's really a matter of finding those instances of good quantitative risk management, because there's a lot of it, a lot more of it than you would be expecting. And even I knew when people told me that there's no risk management, I knew that was a mistake. I knew that was a confusion, and in fact there would be a lot of risk management. But even I was kind of amazed and surprised, and I still am. Every day I discover that people on their own just use stochastic risk analysis to help them make better decisions. None of them call it risk management. None of them even consider that it is risk management, but they do it. So well done to all the teams out there who are not risk managers and yet use better risk management techniques than the risk professionals. And then, of course, on the other side of the coin is I hope the risk managers that do not use techniques that are comparable or better to what the rest of the business uses, they feel at least a little bit embarrassed about it. So that was the first one, the first point. Now the second point was again kind of obvious, but I am still a little bit surprised about just how much of it is required. So people do use quantitative risk analysis a lot in the organization. And different departments, different people, some because they come from financial background, some because they saw it somewhere else and feel it was a useful addition to help them make better decisions. And the kind of the trouble or the challenge that I've come across is that people use it very randomly, as in they may feel like using it on Monday, and then the very same person would completely ignore or forget to do it on Wednesday. Just because it's not part of the DNA, part of the culture of the organization. There's no requirement or expectation that proper risk analysis will be done as part of decision making. Many people do it randomly, and they do it well when they do it, but they also don't do it a lot of the time. And this is, I think, where a great opportunity for the risk professional is to come in and try and make this risk analysis not a once-off exercise, but make it consistent. And consistent in both terms, timing, as in whenever an important decision takes place, do quantitative risk analysis if this is a material important decision, if the time permits. And most of the time it does, because important decisions cost a lot of money, the cost of error is significant, the risk and the uncertainty is huge. So risk analysis is justified most of the time in corporations, in companies of any size. And the job of the kind of the risk professional is first try and make it consistent, as in try and help people do it all the time whenever an important decision takes place, not just when they remembered or they felt like doing it. So that's number one. But number two is making sure it's consistent in terms of the methodology. And that's a big one. I think this is where kind of the 80% of the effort of a typical senior risk professional needs to be spent, because many people do risk analysis, but they apply different methodologies. And you know, one of the surprising things, as I'm sure many of you have seen, is that for some reason, some decision makers, they choose to simulate certain variables and exclude from the calculation or from the risk analysis some other variables, which is great. They applied risk analysis on paper, so they tick that box, and yes, they said, you know, we've done the risk analysis, but in reality, they've actually excluded some of the most important risks because it didn't look good in the final result. So making sure the risk analysis is actually fair and reasonable, I think that's the that's a big part of the job. And I have a few other lessons which I want to share. But again, let me encourage everyone, if you have any ideas on how to make those regular broadcasts more entertaining, if there's anything specific you want me to talk about, or if there's any if there are any questions that you want me to respond, by all means, send it now in questions live, or you can send it later. It's entirely up to you. But use this opportunity. Which I mainly do YouTube videos and articles, and it's not really a live interaction. So I'm grateful for this format that we can actually use live interaction. So the next interesting point, which is something I have been talking a lot about, and even during the Risk Awareness Week, when I was doing my session, I've explicitly talked about it. And I'm learning. Like I had a hypothesis, and now as an acting, actual in-house chief risk officer, I can test all the different hypotheses I was making and see if there's any validity to them, whether they work, whether they make sense. I mean, I'm not all of the hypotheses I'm making are confirmed. Let's just put it that way. But this one is. I have been for a very long time saying that risk managers should really, instead of trying to sell the idea of ERM, which is your kind of enterprise-wide risk management, consistent approach across the organization, breaking down silos, and having this kind of one mammoth methodology that is consistent across the organization. Instead of doing that, which I personally feel is horrible risk management, it's even just from a project management perspective, it's just bad risk management when you're trying to, instead of doing small agile pilots, when you're trying to change the world in the context of an organization. I think that's it's a better idea any way you look at it. And of course, alternative to that is take one decision at the time, and change one decision at the time. So this is a big lesson. This is a big lesson that I've been speaking about for many years, and this is the hypothesis that I personally feel, at least in my experience, is confirmed. Selling the idea of this overall good of risk management as an enterprise-wide initiative works really well on some of the stakeholders that are super high level, like audit committee, or someone who's outside of the company, is not really involved in the overall operations, because they sit back and they enjoy, and they like seeing some sort of consolidated picture of the overall risk profile of the organization. But the actual executives, the actual decision makers within the company, they couldn't care less. They want something completely different. And this is, I think, one of the biggest mistakes many risk managers and most risk consultants do, is they trying to sell this huge elephant, saying that this elephant will change your world, change the way your organization operates. But in reality, what you can do instead is just start very small with specific decisions. Why don't you take one investment decision and try and show how quantitative risk analysis will allow the company to make a better investment decisions, either improve the pricing or reduce the risk or increase the likelihood of the success of that project. And then once you've done that and you had some success selling it to one or two different stakeholders, then you move on to the next decision. The marketing team does some forecasting. Any kind of forecasting is highly risky because they make projections about long-term future. They make projections under huge levels of uncertainty. So we should all be very surprised. Why do they make those projections using single point estimates? Of course, they should be using ranges. Of course, they should be simulating possible future scenarios. Of course, they should be communicating back to the decision makers that future is uncertain, and communicating just how uncertain the future is, so the decision makers can properly incorporate that uncertainty into what they do. And that's another wonderful pilot project. You can work with the marketing team, helping them represent some of the assumptions that they're making as ranges, and then running a simulation or running scenarios. It doesn't have to be highly mathematical necessarily. All you're trying to do is you're trying to find those decisions or forecasts or plans that are very material and highly uncertain, and you're trying to incorporate risk analysis into that to make those decisions better. So the third kind of big lesson for me is that instead of trying to sell this life-changing experience called ERM, why don't we start with small decisions and literally just take it one decision at a time, and that way show that quantitative risk analysis or probabilistic decision making is a powerful tool that has many different applications within the company. And the final for today, which was, this one actually was quite surprising for me, because let me come back to that and respond to the question that Raphael is asking. Which software do I use in risk management? So this is actually a very good question, because there are, well, let me start by giving you a very quick kind of intro into the software in the world of risk management. There are basically two buckets of risk management softwares. Bucket number one, they're called ERM or GRC systems. And these type of systems, they're kind of the aggregation of all the risks within the organization, and they allow you to identify, plug in, rank, or sometimes even quantitatively rank some of the risks, and then generate risk reports. So these are the type of systems that that are designed for the risk manager to maintain his profile of risk for the organizations and generate reports quickly, and so on. With the risk of upsetting some people, I only know one system, which is semi-decent. All of these systems are shit. They're absolute crap. They're just a waste of time. I am surprised how many of them exist. I mean, in 2007, I did a study on dozens of systems that exist, and I think they're just there was some merging in the market, but there's still a lot of them. They're very popular in US, which is a pretty good sign. They're bad. They sponsor all the all the Risk Management One events, so you can easily find them. They are useless and ridiculously expensive. I mean, they should be free. The level of value they deliver, they should be free, but they're not, which is surprising. So these softwares I don't use. Every time I tried to use it was a waste of time, and it's a fundamentally missing. The developers have fundamentally missed the point of risk management as a decision-making tool. So this bucket is a waste of time. Then of course there's the second bucket, and that bucket has a lot of different softwares, but most of them are not called risk management softwares per se, because these are the kind of softwares that allow you to make better risk analysis inside existing decision-making process. The basic ones are, if your decisions are made in Excel, for example, there are a number of companies that sell add-ons to Excel that expand the functionality of Excel to allow you to do quantitative risk analysis inside the actual model or budget or investment proposal that the deal team or the finance team or the CEO is using. And this, I think, this bucket of products, the second bucket, it's essentially Risk Management 1 bucket and Risk Management 2 bucket. This Risk Management 2 bucket is actually very, very useful. They expand the functionality of existing software that decision makers use for their decision making anyway, and give you that extra flexibility to run risk analysis. I love two. I love two for very simple reasons. They're free, and this is, I think, what the I'm surprised they're free, but yet they are. So we're very lucky. One is amazing. It's called SIPMath. SIPMath is created by Sam Savage and his team at probabilitymanagement.org. And it's an add-on to Excel that expands the functionality of Excel. It actually uses or utilizes the inbuilt functionality in Excel to allow you to run Monte Carlo simulations. Amazing, amazing stuff. Obviously has limitations, but for a free price tag, it's a dream come true. And then there's the second dream come true. David Vossi has made his model risk basic version available for free. That's it has a little bit more features. It's a little bit more front end pretty, and it has a lot of tools that you would need as a risk manager to perform quantitative risk analysis. So, and that's called model risk. Google model risk, just Google it as a single word, not as model space risk, because that's a different thing altogether. The SIPMath and model risk are amazing examples of free software on the market that allows you to apply quantitative risk analysis to existing software that the management is using for decision making. Now there are plenty of others. For example, Analytica by Illumina is a whole package of budgeting, planning, decision making that has Monte Carlo simulation inbuilt. So it's an alternative to Excel that has all the functionality of quantitative risk analysis incorporated as a default, which is I think the future of decision making, where quantitative risk analysis is not an add-on or an afterthought. It's built into the actual decision making software. So to finalize the answer to this question, I feel the software that is incorporated or integrated into the actual decision-making software is the most useful one. And there are plenty of those on the market, free and paid. And depending on what software decision makers use, for example, in project management, they use Primavera or project management to build schedules, to estimate project budgets. And there are add-ons, Primavera Risk Analysis or Tamara by Vosi Software. They attach to those decision-making programs and expand the functionality to run risk analysis as well. And for example, Tamara by Vosi Software is also free with limited functionality, but nevertheless, it's a good start. And then on top of that, there are hundreds of specialized softwares that allow companies to specifically measure credit risk, or specifically measure market risk, or specifically measure some engineering types of risks for project management or for designing and so on. So there are plenty of softwares. The good ones are the one that integrate into the actual decision-making software that you use at the moment of making a decision. So that was a very long answer, but hopefully I've answered your question. I do have a video on risk management software on the YouTube channel where I basically say pretty much the same thing, which is kind of ironic because I recorded that video maybe 5 years ago, and I still feel exactly the same way. I have been pitched and saw hundreds of software packages, and the ultimate message hasn't changed. If it's risk management one software, it's a waste of time. You can have it for fun as long as it's not expensive. Risk management two softwares, there are plenty of them, and they're actually quite useful. And we're very, very lucky that the market has some free options available, which are very solid options at that. So feel free to ask questions. By all means, let me know what you're thinking. Deep inside, I promise that as we go forward with those streams, I'll try and kind of work on the format, and it will be a little bit less rambling and random, and I'll try and do some scenarios for the actual conversation. Thank you. Good question. What was the topic for today? The topic for today was very simple. I've discovered this amazing broadcasting functionality, and even though I have 400 something articles and 520 videos, I've never really had kind of a live conversation with the rest of the risk community. And as the practicing senior risk executive in a large international multi-billion-dollar corporation, I'm both testing some of the hypotheses I was making in the articles and videos in the past, and I'm learning some very interesting things. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to share some of the lessons learned with the rest of the community, at least so you don't make the same mistakes. I will have a session, and today this is the first session, so the purpose of today is just to introduce and say, welcome. This is what we will be doing from time to time, once a week. I haven't figured out the day yet, but I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. So final tip for today, and this is this is actually quite a big one because this one took me by surprise. I for years have been saying risk managers shouldn't sell risk management. We shouldn't be selling the idea of managing risk. We shouldn't be selling the idea of identifying risks, assessing risks, mitigating risks. Risk as the concept is only of interest to us, the risk managers. The rest of the company, the decision makers that we work with and who pay our salaries, they don't particularly care about risks per se. They care about the effect risks have on their objectives, their KPIs, their targets, their decisions. And for years I have been saying, instead of selling risk management or the management of risks, whatever you call it, or mitigation plans, no one gives a shit. Instead of selling that, we should really be selling the message that risk analysis improves decision making. And the ironic thing is, it's actually a different sales message every single time. The speaking to the head of investments, you sell different set of benefits of using risk analysis to calculate NPV, IRR, and represent it as a range, as you would to someone in finance when you talk about budgeting. It's basically selling one decision at a time and different benefits of integrating risk management into that specific decision. So every conversation is kind of different. It's the principle is always the same. Quantitative risk analysis gives you more options, gives you a range of possible outcomes. So it expands what may be limited by some of the cognitive biases. It expands the vision that may be limited by cognitive biases. And it allows you to see what are the different options and which option is better in terms of risk and reward balance. Because there are many, for any decision on the planet, there are many good options. And it's all about a specific risk appetite of the decision maker at the time. Because today they may feel like they would want more risk for the same reward, and yesterday they may have felt differently. So that's the message I've been saying for many years. But what kind of surprised me was the conversation I had recently, where I, doing my own thing and kind of living in my own risk management world, I always have a conversation of probabilistic decision making. You apply stochastic, you make decision making stochastic. You apply quantitative risk analysis, and that improves the decision. And what I found is that because I've done this so many times, and I know every time it's different. You can't have a generic conversation about probabilistic decision making or stochastic risk analysis. What I found is when you actually talk to the decision makers, it's really tough to have that generic conversation. It really has to be something very specific to a decision that they understand. And in fact, this was kind of a surprise to me, which I think I will try and learn a lot from. Is that when speaking to decision makers, it's really about talking about a specific, not just investment decision making in general, not just. So let me rephrase the point I'm trying to make. I used to say, don't talk about risks. Talk about risk-based investment decision making. Well, what I've learned this week is that even that is not good enough. When we talk about probabilistic investment decision making, to me this is kind of this means something tangible because I've done so many investment projects. It means apply Monte Carlo simulation, get the correlations right, run the simulation, have a range of NPV values, have a range of IRR values, have payback period range, and make all sorts of conclusions after that. Well, what I have discovered this week, even that is too generic for a conversation with a senior executive. Sometimes, maybe it's just a personal preference, but I was a little bit surprised and probably unprepared as well as I wanted to be. Is that sometimes it's just too broad to talk about investment decision making in general, and sometimes it's necessary to actually pick a project, run the simulation, make the conclusions for that specific pilot project, and then talk about that specific pilot project where you talk about specific numbers, not just generic NPV range, but you actually talk about the actual figures that you've derived from your calculations. So that was the final point I wanted to make today. I was surprised. I was surprised that you really need to be super specific about the benefits or the value of quantitative risk analysis, because it's relatively new for many people. Even if it's not new, they may have seen glimpses of it in the past, and they didn't kind of appreciate the value then, so they still haven't been sold on the idea. So this is what I'll be trying to do in the beginning of the year. I will try and do as many small pilots as I can. So I have those little points of conversation. Whenever I talk about quantitative risk analysis, I can talk about a specific plant being built in a specific part of the country, and the specific problems that we solved using risk analysis for that decision. And let me just answer your last question. I mean, that's everything I wanted to talk about today. If you have more questions, by all means, do ask them in the comments. Does the risk assessment predict future outcome or report past activities? I mean, that's kind of an obvious question. Risk deals with uncertainty. There's no uncertainty around past activities. So by definition, risk management is all about the future effect of uncertainty on the decision or objective or KPI or bonus or whatever your decision point is. So yes, of course, risk management is about potential future outcomes. And this is a brilliant question, because it highlights so many different misconceptions. First, risk management is not about reporting past activities. I mean, it never was. Even in 16th century, when the probability theory was kind of developing, it was never about past activities. I don't know who came up with that. I mean, I'm guessing it has something to do with reporting for the regulators and insurance. This is not risk management. The second point in your comment is actually very, very illuminating, is that you're asking, does the risk assessment predict future outcome? Well, there are two mistakes in that one little sentence. First, risk management doesn't predict anything. It simulates possible future outcomes. And the second mistake, it's not outcome. Future is not singular. Future is plural. And that means there are always multiple outcomes of any decision, any activity. And so risk management allows us today, without waiting for 5 years or 6 months until something actually happens, it allows us today to simulate what the possible futures may be. Possible futures may be, and adjust our decision making today, appreciating what the possible futures may be. Because sometimes, for example, the management may think that this particular course of action is good, but we can show using our risk analysis that if they do that, they're actually highly unlikely to achieve their objective. For example, once when I was trying to do risk analysis on the 2020 strategy, this was many, many years ago, part of our analysis was to show that the likelihood of achieving the strategic objectives, given the assumptions that the management has made and given the uncertainty around those assumptions, was less than 1%. That means there was more than 99% chance that they will be unsuccessful. And they know this now, today. They don't have to implement the strategy and then be surprised. Already today, we can tell them, before the strategy was signed, we can tell them that this was going to fail with a very, very high probability. So management obviously didn't sign that strategy. They changed the strategy until the probability of success was 70%. And there was a 30%, 70% chance of failure. And that was the acceptable balance for the decision makers, saying that, yes, we're going to implement something which is most likely going to succeed, but yes, there is still a chance that it will fail. So this is what risk management is ultimately about. Yes, I'm reading your comment about weather forecasting. Maybe, I mean, if you want, you can expand on that, because I don't understand that comment. Weather forecasting, by the way, which is a fascinating fact for you, weather forecasting is some of the best risk analysis on the planet. It has so no risk analysis is perfect. That's a given, right? Because predicting the future is impossible. It's too complex. And so weather forecasting has the lowest error So we make a mistake whenever we think about the future. That's a given. What we're trying to do with risk management is we're trying to minimize the uncertainty. We're trying to minimize the error when we actually live to see the day. What happens would be not too dissimilar to what we have forecasted. So weather forecasting actually has the best track record of having the lowest error in terms of how they do it. And there are wonderful books written about it, about weather forecasting and the methodologies and the highly complex models that they use. And they don't just obviously use the past, as in any risk analysis. And I think Mark Powell may be disagreeing with me on that. But I have a slightly different approach to him. We do use the past whenever we can, but we're very cognizant of the fact that past is in no way, like it's not a guaranteed predictor of the future, and whatever rules whatever rules applied to the events happening in the past, it doesn't mean that they will continue to apply in the future. So we use both forecasting some of the assumptions and using historical statistics on some of the assumptions when we try to do risk analysis. So I think I've bored you enough for the first session. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have questions, feel free to send them to me on the Risk Academy blog or in LinkedIn comments or YouTube comments. Use all the venues available. I'll see you next week, and we'll see what interesting lessons we can talk about next week. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you soon.